So we're going to focus now on waste. And what I mean by waste is I'm going to use this word, M-U-D-A, muda. This is the Japanese word for waste. And the reason why it's important, because if you Google muda, you will get all the things I'm talking about, which is business waste. If you Google waste, you might get the local skip hire company. So we just use that word first, but then let's go into real activity. Waste is everywhere. And if you look at some of the academic sort of research, probably 50% of the world's economy is pure waste. So this should be very topical, this in the future of the world, because we all want a good environment. But the starting point for that, for people in the workplace, is to understand what we mean by waste. Probably the best way to describe waste would be anything that you do that consumes time that you can't charge to the customer. So if you're looking for information, I bet you all look for information when you're trying to put a proposal together or try to project manage something. If you're looking for tools, if you're out doing something practical, we all consume time looking for things. We did an exercise recently, actually, with an IP company that specialised in intellectual property, and what they realised was across their team, they spend a lot of time looking for things. There's a great example where they have all this information within in their systems when they're doing their due diligence for their clients, but because they couldn't find it, we even found activities where people went and Googled it for something that they already had in their business. The exercise that the two guys that are involved on the program did was they put a value to the cost of looking for things that should be easily retrievable, was £176,000 over the year. And in theory, all that could be eliminated. But even if we only eliminate 50%, which should be quite easy to do, there's an opportunity to add £80,000 worth of productivity improvement to your bottom line. So now, when we look at the textbooks, the original wastes were referred to as the 7 wastes. A guy called Taiko Ono, that was his real name, that brought that to the management textbooks with the original Toyota production system, which is very industrial. I do still like to use the 7 wastes because I'm a purist of where it came from. But you'll have examples now of people talk about the 8 wastes and the 9 wastes. It's just how things evolve. So let's have a look at what a waste might be. Well, a defect. A defect is anything that's not right. That document you've passed to me is incorrect. That specification is incorrect. The information that I need to use here, it's not got the right numbers on it. Or it's late, it's costing me time. It's a defect. And every processes have defects. Have you ever thought about how much time you wait for people to make decisions, to come back to you? How does that impact on your working day? When you analyse that, okay, you can argue that we could do other things while we're waiting. But really, the waiting time is stopping you from completing a project, completing a work activity. And that has an impact on the whole supply chain. Because if you're waiting, the next person's waiting, the next person's waiting. How frustrating is it waiting for things? And often we're waiting for things because people don't measure the amount of waiting time, so no one does anything about it. Once you start measuring it, you've got a reason to do something about it. You can't always control it, but at least you know where it is, and then you can try and work out, can we control it? So when people say to me, well, I've measured the waste, but it's not something that I'm accountable for, I think a good improvement project is just to measure the waste, because that gives us the reason to make the change, which we can pass up the supply chain to people that we might work for or work with. Another a good example of what waste is what I call transportation, moving things around. Well, moving things around, you can see it physically. If I'm working with an industrial business, I can watch people and think, there's a lot of movement going on between how they load that vehicle or how they take things off here. I mean, we've worked a lot with in the food sector, the distribution of food across the island. We can make a lot of unnecessary trips. It's got bad for the environment and it's bad for productivity. So we measure it, we can do things about it. One thing that is probably hard to measure, but once you start thinking about it, you can, is moving things digitally, electronically, moving things behind that computer screen. take your mind into the back of your computer screen about how things are segmented, where things are stored, where information finds itself, and work out how easy it is to find the information. We work with a HR outsourcing company as part of the program recently, and we asked them the people that worked, all the various associates that work for this organization, to file simple documents. And we found that from 8 people, we got 8 variations. So suddenly now we've got 8 ways of doing something. Can you imagine going to McDonald's and buying your hamburger and there's 8 variations of what you get? That's going to lead to customer dissatisfaction. And if we get used to that, we put up with it. And the thing about waste is, when we start analysing waste, there is so much of it that we get used to it and we don't think we can do anything about it. And here's something that I want people to remember with waste is, if you accept poor performance, you'll always have it. Once you start accepting that document always comes in wrong, so I make the changes, it's easy to do it myself, you're not getting to the root cause. Once you start to accept poor performance, you accept waste, you get used to it, it becomes the norm, and then people don't see it as waste anymore. When we do any project, the starting point for getting the data is to measure the waste. Now, if I go back 50, 60 years when people started really focusing on productivity and business improvement, the emphasis would always be on the jobs people were doing. You'd find work-study engineers going out, monitoring people, sometimes filming people to work out where the waste was. And that to me is old way of thinking, and it shouldn't be done anymore. The way to look at improving the job is to look at the waste. Because if you start looking at the activity of doing the job, you're looking for how that person, how that individual is actually doing something, and that becomes very intrusive. If you start to look for where the waste is, you then get the person involved to find the waste for themselves. You turn that round. It's not the consultant or the so-called expert analysing, it's the person doing the job analysing the waste. I have never met a person ever that can't find waste. So everybody can come back from one of our programs and find waste. And once you find the waste, get the numbers to it, and you can document that waste into what I would call a problem statement. What is the problem, and then what is the data that gives me an indication on what the problem is? Going back to our example earlier, lots of people looking for stuff in this IP company, and then the problem statement was, we spend £176,000 a year looking for things. Now that's quite an interesting way to look at it, and that should make you smile. It might make the accountants worry a little bit, but that's what I want people to do. Make the case for the moment that people realise we can do something about this. If we want you to now look at the waste in your business, first of all, the starting point is just find any process and just make that process visual. Just do it, I always say, do it a bit Blue Petery. Don't get this software out and get all technical with flowcharts. I did it very, very briefly. It was actually with another HR company. Walked in and they weren't ready for me, so they had a big whiteboard, and I said, right, can I follow a job through this business? And within 20 minutes, we had mapped out how a project comes in and how it goes out with all the top steps. And then I don't know anything about this business. I just started asking what I call the silly questions, like, how often does that happen? How many of those? Where's that information come from there? And that led to the room of people saying, well, yeah, we get a lot of issues there. Yeah, we get a lot of issues here. And then we start talking about, well, that's waste, isn't it? Have we got a value to it? And something very simple like, well, what's the value of proposals that are outstanding today? Put a numerical value to it. I've found companies that say we've got £1 million worth of proposals that we've put work into putting in place, but they're still sat there. I look at that as saying, well, that's work you've put in, which is all waste until those proposals become something that can bring fees into your business. So once you've got that information, find out, well, why are they still sat there? And then you can do something to think, I can move them quicker, and then all that work you've put in now isn't waste anymore, because it's now something that is giving value to the business. But work expands to fill a time available. People will get busy doing things. If you give them a 10, 30, 20, 40-hour contract, whatever it is, they will fill their day. And most of their day will be filled with waste, not because they are sort of inefficient people, but because people like to be busy. I like people to get busy on doing things that add value. And the best way to do that is get people to understand what are the wastes. I can give you a 7 waste template. You can read that, understand that, and then you can go away, map something out, and then start to find out where the waste shows itself. And I just say, get a red sticker, write down what it is. Red equals waste. You look back, you see a lot of red, and then you can start to dig into what's the detail now behind that red. But the starting point should be, keep it simple. If it's a waste, trigger off it's a waste. The detail comes later.